All right, so welcome to a whirlwind tour of Git. These are the kind of things we're going to talk about. So what is Git? How can you install Git? Then we're actually going to put Git into practice with the project we're going to make. And then also Git with GitHub. So you may have heard of Git and GitHub. You're not sure they're the same thing, different things. They're different things, but they're closely related. You almost always use them together. So how do you sort of use those together? And then if there's time, we'll see. We're starting here at about 15 after, so we'll see. But I also have some extra slides with like some tips and tricks for more advanced people who are intermediate or advanced, already sort of know Git. All right, so what is Git? Basically, it's a version control system that was originally created for tracking versions in the Linux kernel. And so, okay, you might be like, what is version control? Like, why would I use it? What is the benefit of having this? Basically, how many people here have done something where like you're trying to work on code with someone and so you send them the file, or you send them a zip with the whole project and you email it or send it over Discord or whatever you're doing, right? I know I've done this like a number of times before I learned how to use Git, and it kind of sucks. It has a lot of problems. One of them is that you end up with these files proliferating. Like so you start off with good old program.c or something like that. And then you're like, okay, I've fixed it. This is going to be the final version. But whenever you mark something as final, it's never the final version. Am I right? It's never the final version, okay? So you're going to end up with final program 1, and then maybe you say, oh, I'm going to do capital F to make it final for sure, or something like that. And before you know it, you're at this last line, actually final program 1, fix stupid bug.c. And like this, I've done this before. I've seen people do this before. And like, this is a problem. It's really not a great way to keep track of different versions of your code over time, just to keep renaming files and trying to guess like that. So version control is basically a way to do this, but in a much better way. So you don't have to rename the files. You can have many, many more versions, and it's all very efficient. Okay, so that's basically what Git is, basically the most popular version control system. So there are others. Most of them these days, Git is kind of like the monopoly market share just because it's the best. But there are other ones. If you go work at a company, they might use something older if they have something they've used for many years. There's some other options, but Git's the main one. That's why it's the best one to learn. Everybody uses it. If you put it on your resume, it's something that recruiters will look for. So if you're going to work in a team of any size, then you're probably going to use Git because it's sending people files and stuff. You can try to do pair in small groups, like for classes and things. Like I've worked with people, you just get on a Zoom call or get together in person, right? And you look over each other's shoulder and do code. But if you're working in a group that's like 5 people, 10 people, 15 people, at some point it doesn't scale. You can't do that anymore. And so what do you have? You have Git. That solves your problem. There's some other nice things too, so it does help with big projects. And also you'll understand all of the Git related humor on the internet about like bad merge conflicts and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so installing Git. If you don't already have Git installed, you're going to want to head to this URL. You can also just Google like Git installer and then pick whatever your operating system is and just run through the installer. I'm not going to walk through that here because I already have it installed, but just as I'm going through these next slides, if you want to try to follow along today, you can do that. These slides will also be posted after the workshop. So if you want to take it at your own pace later, by all means do that. But you can just go through the installer, pick all the default options. They're all fine. You can change it all later if you don't like them. Okay, so how do I actually use Git? Basically, Git, you start just inside of a folder. So a Git repository is just a folder. So you're going to have a folder where your project starts out. So say we have a directory hello world here. And then you're going to type Git init. And there you go. You have a brand new Git project. You have nothing inside of it, but we'll soon add some content and you'll be able to get going with that. So let's actually hop over to the terminal now. You don't have to use a terminal. There are like desktop tools you can use for Git, but I highly recommend at least learning the terminal commands once, because once you understand how the terminal commands interact, how they work, using a GUI tool like GitHub Desktop or something like that is going to make a lot more sense, because you can very clearly see like how, okay, if I click this button, it's mapping to this action. If you get kind of a command line understanding, I think that's the best way to learn it. So we're just going to start a project. The project we're going to build today is actually a Discord bot. So I'm just going to make a folder, license bot demo. One problem I was having kind of within the Nighthacks Discord server is people post their GitHub links all the time. And anytime someone posts a GitHub link, the first thing I do is click on it and go and see if they've added a software license. I'm kind of like the software license evangelist here at Nighthacks. And so I'm always like, hey, you don't have a license on your software, add a license. And I was like, I do this so often. It's such a pain to yell at people to add a license. Why don't I write a bot to do all this work for me, and just add as a server, it can automatically read all the messages, tell people they don't have a license, and I can just move on with my life. So that's what we're going to be building today. So, but of course you can use Git for any kind of project. It can be code, it can be just any text. You can even track like binary, like if you have like images or something for like a Unity project or something, you can do that as well. It doesn't work as well, but it really works well with text. I've taken notes in Git for classes before. It all works really well. Okay, so we just made a folder. You can also just make a folder through your file explorer, whatever you're familiar with. And then we're going to do, I just did CD there if you weren't paying attention with a folder name. Now we're in that folder. Okay, you can see it here. Your terminal might look a little different, but don't worry. Different terminals look different. So to start our Git project, we're going to do something called Git init. And ignore all this stuff. It's going to say initialize empty Git repository in this folder. And all this really does, if you look carefully, so these dot and dot dot, if you're not familiar with those, dot just refers to the current folder. The double dot is the parent folder. And then when we run git init, all it does is create this .git folder. So that's how Git works. It's just a folder that has a bunch of data. That's where all the old versions are hiding when you use your version control, which we'll see here in a minute. So, okay, there you go. You've made a basic Git repository. If you have Git bash or like a nice terminal, you might also get like a branch here. So we'll talk about branches later, but basically when you start, you have one branch. It's usually called something like master, main, something like that. And that's what you're going to start out with. So, okay, how do we actually begin to use Git to like track some stuff? Let's see that. So what we need to do first is just make some content. Let's, add something to our folder. So you can use whatever editor you want. In this case, the way I'm going to add some content is just by setting up our project. So this is not Git specific, but since our project is going to be an npm project, we're going to need to do npm init. So run npm init. Just agree to all the default things. You can change them later if you care. Okay, so it's going to do that. And then if we list all the files in our directory here, if you want, we can see the hidden ones too. Right, so those two references back to other folders are still there. Our Git folder's there, and then npm init creates package.json. That's all it does. It just creates this. That's how an npm package exists. It's just a package.json. Yeah, question.
We tried that.
You probably don't have npm.
That makes sense.
Yes. So if you want to get npm, I don't have a lot of time here today. If you want to go get npm, you can just Google like install npm or Node.js and download that. If not, just you can come back through. This is applicable. You can also just make another file or another project, like just make a different program than what I'm making here today. Okay. So now that we have that installed, I highly recommend, especially when you're learning to use Git, run Git Status all the time. Even after you know how to use Git, still run Git Status all the time. Because it can be very easy to get confused about sort of what the state of the whole system is if you don't run it. So it'll basically tell you what to do. It's very helpful. So Git Status telling us, okay, we're on branch master here. We don't have any commits. A commit is just a snapshot of your whole project. So you're like, okay, I think things are mostly working here, or I finally made this change I want to make. I'm going to take a snapshot. Then you're going to make a commit. So we don't have any commits because we just started the project. And then untracked files, this red here, as I'll refer to it, shows all of the files Git has noticed. These files have been created. These files have been edited, but you haven't chosen to make them into a commit yet. So they're just, because you don't always want to, you might be familiar with something like Google Docs or a document where like when you edit it, it automatically kind of just saves it whenever for you. The reason you don't want to do that with code is like if you're in the middle of typing a line and then it just decides to take a snapshot right then, like your code's probably just syntax error broken. So it doesn't really make sense to take snapshots except when you sort of specify you want one. So the way you specify you want one is you make a commit. And the first thing you have to do before you make a commit is say what files you want to include in the commit. Usually you want to include everything you've done, but sometimes, as we'll see later, you just want to include some files to kind of maybe break things up into a couple of commits. The way you say that, okay, I have this file, I want to include it into my next snapshot. How do I do that? You just run git add and then the file name. So we'll do that. It doesn't really give you any output, but if you run git status, you'll see something has changed. Okay, instead of this untracked files, instead of this red text, we now have changes to be committed. And it'll show in green all the things that are kind of staged to be, now that we've said, okay, we designated these to be committed, we're ready to go, and we can run git commits. So what git commit will do is it will open up whatever your default editor is. So in this case, by default, it usually opens up Vim. If you're not familiar with that, just set your default editor in your system settings to something else. You can Google how to set it up, so Git will respect that. And it'll open up VS Code or Sublime or whatever, Notepad. Don't use Notepad, but whatever you use, it'll do that for you. And then it'll basically open up this file with a bunch of comments in it. But the important thing is that we have to write a message for our commit. So we're not just taking a snapshot. We have to say something about okay, what changes did we actually make? You can always just type whatever you want. It's up to you, but I definitely recommend making the commit message useful. There are some conventions people follow to make it easier to do this. So what people usually do is you always write it in as kind of the end of the following sentence. This commit will, and then that's your commit message. So in this case, what did we do? We initialized our NPM project. So we might say, this commit will initialize our NPM project. Something like that. You don't have to follow that convention, but that is sort of the standard way to do it. People who are experienced with Git usually follow it. Sometimes a company or organization will have another standard, but that's by default, that's what I recommend you do. And then you just need to save this file that you're in and close it. And there you go. You now have a commit. So you can see here, it gives us some information. We changed one file. We added 11 lines. There we go. If we want to look back at what commits we've made before, we can run git log. So to show, we'll talk about this later, but basically it'll show, here's our commit message. You can see, oh, I did it. Here's when I did it. All the information about it. That's great. So now that we have that, we kind of have our very first commit initializing an NPM project. Let's just continue adding some more commits. So the next thing we're going to need for this bot is the discord.js library. Basically, to interface with Discord, the easiest way is discord.js or another library. And the way you're going to get that is npm install discord.js. So wait for that to run for a minute. Basically, what that's going to do is if we run Git Status, we can actually see what's changed. This is another great thing about Git Status. Have you ever had a project where you open it, it makes a bunch of temporary files, or you run a command and you're not really sure what happened? Well, the nice thing about Git Status is it will always tell you everything that has changed since the last time you committed. So you can very easily see what's happened. Okay, our package.json changed, which is normal. That always stores all the different things we've installed. We have this new folder, node modules, and we also have this package lock.json. That's related to package.json. Don't worry too much about it. It's part of the NPM whole installation. We could just go and commit all of these things, but generally you don't want to commit node modules. And many languages will have something like this. It's like a folder where all of your external libraries and code are stored. And you don't want to commit this because it gets very big, like hundreds of megabytes, gigabytes large, and pushing that up over the network is terrible. And the truth is that from package.json and package lock.json, npm can reconstruct node modules. So if you think about package.json, we can go inside and look there. It's basically just a list of all of the dependencies. So you can see right here, it says we have discord.js. We don't need to actually have the physical, all the code for discord.js in our project, as long as we know we can get it by just looking, and we know where to get it from the package.json. So we don't really want to include the node modules, since it's going to be so big, into our commit. So how do we do that? One thing we could do is just choose not to add it. So we can just add package.json. We can add package block.json. Okay, so now those two are in the green. So since those are the only ones in the green, node modules isn't going to be included into our commit. We can run our commit and we can say add discord.js. Okay, and if we look in the log now, we see we have two commits. So you can kind of think of it like a linked list. So our root commit was this initialized npm project, and then we now have this new commit, add discord.js, and it has a pointer back to its parent, which is our initial commit where we set up the npm project. The problem with doing this approach, though, where we just add only things we want, is over time, the number of files we might want to be we're never going to commit this, is just going to grow. And having personally, I don't like seeing the red in the terminal. It just makes me feel like I need to commit whatever it is. So a very common pattern and something you can do with Git is a file called .gitignore. And basically, if you just edit this file and put in the names of any folders or files you don't want to be included into your Git project, then Git will automatically ignore them. So we can just type node modules into here. So if we like look at all the files, you can see we now have this .gitignore file. And if we run Git Status now, you'll notice node modules is gone. And now it's saying, oh, you have a gitignore file that you haven't tracked. So why don't we make a commit for our gitignore? Okay. Now if we run Git Status, you'll see everything's committed, right? Nothing to commit, working tree clean. That means since your last commit, nothing has changed except things that you maybe gitignore. Okay, so that's pretty good. We have a couple commits. We've installed discord.js, which is what we're going to be using throughout the project here. Let's actually get started on like making the bot. So the first thing we'll need to do is just make a JavaScript file that's going to contain the code for our bot. So I'm going to use index.js. You can use whatever name you want, but that's what I'm going to use. And what we're going to want to do is import client from discord.js. So if you're not familiar with JavaScript, don't worry too much. You should be able to pick up the gist of it. Git is like, it's language agnostic. So you can use it with C, you can use it with Java, JavaScript, Python, notes, like you can, whatever you want, any kind of text is going to be fine inside of Git. So we're going to import our client, and the way we actually set up our client for discord.js is it's like a new constructor. So we're going to make a new client, and we might need to add some options as well. So I believe we need to add something called intent. This is what gives permissions to our bot to do certain things. So again, don't worry too much if you're not familiar with discord.js or JavaScript. Okay. I think that's all we need to add there. And then the other thing we need to do is actually log in to our client. So to actually log in, we want to have like a bot user basically set up. So to do that, I'm going to head over to the Discord developer portal. All right. And if you just look up Discord developer portal, it'll be one of the top options. But here is where you can manage all of your different Discord bots you have or applications that are connected to Discord. So let's make a new one, and I'm going to call it license bot 2 because I already made one of these before. Okay, and it's going to open up this page with the bot. The important things that we do is actually like set up a bot user. So we need to add for some reason, it just doesn't give you one by default. And then we're going to have this token that we can use to say, okay, that's how Discord can tell this bot is logging into, or this code on your computer is logging into this bot user. It's this token. So we'll copy that token, and we're going to put it in this login here. Okay. So you can, of course, make your own. If you're watching this later on YouTube, don't worry. I'm going to destroy this token so it doesn't log into anything. So don't even think about trying to use it. In general, when you have like tokens or like anytime you have like long strings that have lots of letters and numbers in it, it's probably a bad idea to just post it publicly on the internet, because if it gives you permission to do anything, a lot of times it's connected to billing. And so you don't want other people to get a hold of those things. For Discord, I feel like it's mostly probably harmless, but that being said, who knows? The other thing we're going to want to do is set up permissions for our bot inside of Discord here. So we need the bot permission. And then if you scroll down here, in order to actually read, we need to read people's messages. And then if they have a GitHub URL that doesn't have a license, then we need to yell at them about it, right? So we're going to be able to send messages. I don't think we need any of these other things. I don't remember using any of these. So we should be fine with just that. And then what you need to do is go to this copy. So when you check all the options you want, the way Discord works, you copy this, you go to this link, and it will prompt you to add your bot to a server. So I'm gonna pick a server. I'm gonna pick, oh, here we go, my test server. All right, I am human. All right, so we should be set up now. If we head over to that bot server, we can see, I don't know, does this get bigger? Oh, it does. Maybe. Oh, here we go. Maybe a little too big. Okay, so this is my bot server. I just have, this is where I test bots. So you can see our bot just joined. Until we actually start running some code, though, nothing's going to happen. So let's do that. The simplest thing to do to make sure you have like your bot setup working is to call this client.once. And basically you pass in a string ready, and then you pass in some code that you want to run when the bot is ready. So I'm just going to do console.log bot is ready. So as soon as our bot is ready and like set up, then we should be able to get that logged out. So let's see if that works. To actually run this project, you just have to run node. This is a lot like if you're familiar with Python or like C, using GCC or writing the Python command in a file. Node's the same thing for JavaScript. So we're going to run this, and it's going to complain because we cannot use the import statement outside of a module. Basically, we need to either add this line to our package.json, or we need to use the MJS extension instead. So that's fine. I'm just going to use the MJS extension. So we'll move our file from index to MJS, and let's try it again. Nope, intent is not defined. Forgot to import something. All right. Git field invalid. No, it doesn't like it. Must have something different from my other one. Let's see. Fields. Ah. And guild messages. Okay. That should hopefully fix it. Okay. So there we go. Now we have bot is ready. So at this point, you may have noticed I didn't make any commits to that process. Usually you can commit at any point, but usually what I try to do is like kind of like a save in a video game. Like you don't want to like save like right when you're in the middle of a battle and like in big trouble or whatever. You want to like you want to make a commit, same thing with commits. Try to make a commit when you feel like the project's in like a stable state. Like, you don't have any half lines of code, or like if everything's broken, like don't commit it. It'll make your life a lot easier later on, because again, it commits a snapshot. So if you want to roll back to it, you always have the option to do that very easily. And if some of your snapshots are broken, then when you try to roll back to them someday, you might be very sad. Of course, you can always commit broken things if you want. Like I can't stop you, but don't do it. Anyway, at this point, I feel like it's working pretty well. So why don't we go ahead and commit this? I'm going to show you a little trick you can do that will speed up typing all this stuff out. So if you run git add dot, if you remember what I said earlier, dot is a reference to the current folder. So a lot of times, in this case, we only have one file. But if we have a lot of files, like say you have 5 files, and you're typing git add this, git add that, that could take a while. If you run git add dot, it adds everything in your current folder. So that's much quicker usually. And even in this case, like it's still faster than typing out the name. So I use git add dot a lot. I recommend you do it as well. Just makes it easier. And so we have everything added. We can now commit. And I think I'm just going to do okay, let me see if anyone has a suggestion. What would a good commit message for this commit be? Suggestions, let's see. Zoom chat, do you have any suggestions? In person, people are failing me. Nope, okay. I will write another commit message. You don't know. Okay, well, that's fine. That's fine. Especially if you're just starting, it might be kind of like, how do you know what to write for a commit message? You're always trying to describe what it did. So, I mean, you can always like, sometimes if I'm in a hurry, I'll just do dot, or if it's like a repository I don't care about, just to have, because you have to put something there. But you should always try to do your best to describe what the commit actually does. So if we look down here, we can see what got added, what got removed. Yeah, so someone in chat says initialize bot. That would probably be a good way to do things. So let's do that. Initialize. But remember, our convention is this commit will our message. So if we say this commit will initialized bot, hopefully that doesn't sound quite right to your ear. It's because it's in the wrong tense. So be careful with the tense. It might seem like a silly thing, but it's an easy way to tell if someone is experienced with Git or not. Do they use the right tense in their messages? So just always think to yourself, this commit will initialize bot. And now maybe it's not a great sentence, but at least grammatically it makes sense. Okay, so we've got that. We've initialized our bot. Good to go. The next thing we want to do is actually start reading messages, right? So this is great. We have it just printing a thing once we're ready to go. But how do we actually print messages? For that, use the client.on method. And you'll see this common across a lot of libraries, especially in JavaScript, but in other event-driven scenarios too. Basically, anytime you have a situation where you're like, I want to take events that are coming in, like users sending messages or emails arriving or users clicking on things, right? It's not like a regular piece of code. You don't just run it from top to bottom. You kind of have to respond to things that are happening. You'll see this some kind of event listener kind of syntax being used. And so that's sort of what all this is. You specify an event that you want. So in this case, we're going to do message create. That's going to be, this event's going to be triggered anytime anyone sends a message in a server this bot's in. So that's pretty good. And then what you're doing, this other syntax here, if you're not familiar with that, is basically a function that will be run, or a block of code that's going to get run when that event happens. So we're going to do the same thing here. The special thing about message create is it comes provided with a message parameter. So whatever the message that was created is, we're going to get that. And we can actually log out the content to make sure this is working. So basically, anytime we get a message, we're going to take that and then log out the content in it. And if you're wondering, like, where are all of these, like, message.content, why is it .content and not something else? That's just what the Discord API and docs say to do. That's how it works. If you write your own library, you can make it whatever you want. Okay, let's try running this. Okay, so our bot is ready. Hopefully, it's logged in. We can see here that it's online in my server here, so that's good. And let's just send hello. So send hello. Then let's go back and see. Oh, there we go. We're getting the content right here. It logged that out. So now we know we're able to watch just arbitrary messages. If you want to get out of something like that that's just kind of running, you can always do Control-C. All right. So we've got that. We can now log out a message anytime we have something going. This might be a good place to make a commit. We also could add a little bit more stuff. But I'm just going to go ahead and do a commit here. Okay, and so here I'm going to say log out incoming messages. This commit will log out incoming messages. Can't spell. All right. Making sense to everyone? Hopefully nothing has been too wild thus far. Okay, so what's our next step? We're able to log out messages, right? And that's pretty good. But we want to be able to tell, we want to basically be able to say, when is someone using a GitHub link? So one way we can do that is with a regular expression. So what that will look like, regular expression, I did a workshop on this last year. If you're not familiar with it, it's just a way to match against certain patterns in text. So I'm actually just going to steal the one over here from my repository, from my other code, keep us moving along. You can learn how to write these. You can also just find ones that other people have made. They're super good for matching text. So basically, this is going to match any GitHub link. You can kind of see that, and then there's some magic in here. Don't worry too much about that. We can use this to extract the repository out of a GitHub link. So if we just go to, like, here's my example I was working earlier. This is my notes from my machine learning class. So I don't think that's going to get better if I blow it up, but every repository basically is going to be github.com/your username/the repository name. And we're actually going to use the GitHub API to do the license checking. So how can we tell if someone has a software license? Like, this repository doesn't have a license. If you have a license, it'll be in like a license or license.md file or something like that. We don't have one in this thing. So if we post this link in the server, the bot should complain. And so how can we do that? Well, there's actually, if you go to GitHub's API, just look up the GitHub API and you'll find the docs, getting started with the REST API. Basically, you can make a request to, let's go down to repositories. If you look here, you just make a request to https://api.github.com/repos, and then you put that username and the name of the repository, and it will give you back all kinds of interesting information about it. So we can actually just try this command if we want to run it on our command line here. And let's change this to that repository. Okay, so if we run this, you see we're going to get back all kinds of data about it. One thing about the GitHub API that I'm not going to do today, but you should do, if you want to use it at any scale, get an API key. It's all in the docs how to do that, and that will let you make many requests, but just anonymous people can make 60 requests per hour. So you can see it says 60 here, and already have used 22, at least in the last hour. So, hopefully we don't use too many because it'll just start blocking me. But yeah, that's something good to know. Okay, so how do we actually make a request? There's many libraries you can use to do this. I'm going to use one called node fetch. So you just type in import fetch from node fetch. To actually use this, we're going to have to install that as well. So I'll install that. Okay, so now I've kind of gotten to a point where, in terms of Git, I have a lot of different things I'm sort of doing at the same time. So maybe I don't want to bundle all these in one commit. One thing I often see people doing is like bundling all of, oh, hold on. I have low battery. Does anyone have a charger? I have low battery. No. Yeah, I have not. It's probably because Zoom. USB-C. So new, I guess, right? Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. If you could find me an outlet somewhere here too.
What do you need?
I just need an outlet, right?
Surely there's gotta be one around here. Is there
Yeah,
one in the
there
corner?
would be one. Is there not one back here somewhere?
Usually there's one right here.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so anyway, as I was saying, we should try to break down our commits so that we don't have one monster commit with everything. Because later when you try to trace down the bugs in your program and you're like, oh, I think this commit caused the problem, and the commit is, 45 files changed, 2,000 lines added, 500 lines removed, you're going to be very sad because you'll have no idea what caused the problem. So in this case, why don't we just include all of the package JSON changes? So these two files, that's related to installing node fetch. Let's make that one commit, and then all this other stuff can be another commit. Okay, so we were adding node fetch. All right. And so all this stuff, basically, if we run Git status again, you'll see that our index changes are still ready to be committed later. Okay, so we have this regular expression. We can match on our content with this. So basically, we want to do we're going to match against our message content. So message.content, and then there's a .match function, and basically it takes a regular expression in. So we'll pass in our regular expression, and it will give us back some data about whether we got any matches. So you can sort of see an example. Let's just log that out so we can sort of see how it works. Okay. So if we just type hello, then our match gives us back null because there's no GitHub links in that. But if we type an actual GitHub link, then we'll get back this array with a bunch of things in it. But the important thing is the second item at index 1, which will give us that extracted string that we need, right? With the URL we're going to go to. We have that now. We can use fetch to make our request. So we're going to go to here. Or no, we need to use the API. So let's go back to the docs. So it's api.github.com, and then you put /repos too. Grab all of that. Oh, Zoom chat, this is probably a while ago, but you're writing notes for Hollander and GitHub. I am. I take most of my notes in GitHub. I don't know, just used to it. Okay, so we have that. And then at the end here, we're going to concatenate that first match if we have it. So we should also check if that match is even a thing. So let's check if it's not null, then we go for doing all this stuff. All right, and we're going to make this fetch request. There's a couple other things we're going to need to do in order to actually extract the data out. Don't worry too much about this. If you've made a request in JavaScript, it'll make sense. If not, just look it over after. You'll be able to figure it out. Okay. And we need to mark this as async. So what this should do is let us get the actual data for the repository. So let's test that before we commit it. Or why don't we commit it before we test it, just so you can see what you would do if you screwed up. Okay, so say I'm thinking, okay, grab repo information from GitHub. So we did that, and now let's test it and see if it works. And maybe something will break, but who knows? Copy this. And that. Okay, so actually, looks like nothing broke, so we're lucky. Usually I get some problem from typos or something. So we got back all the data. You can see all this data. They sent us back. This is all that same stuff we had in the other place. Any programming language is going to be able to make requests to an API. If your language is any good, you can make requests to an API. So this is how you do in JavaScript. There's other languages, other ways to do it as well. What we're interested in most, though, is this license field. So you see it's null because it doesn't have a license. But let's run this program on a repository that does have a license. So let me see. I scroll up and get the one I was using before. Another one of my repositories. Maybe. Okay, that's fine. I know my repositories, so we can do this. So here's another one of my repositories that should have a license. So if we send that, you can see here, we get a license that's not null. So it's Mozilla Public License 2.0. That's great. Okay, so what we want to do is basically check whether or not this is going to, whether that license field is null. So let's make that our next commit. So we can say if repo.license is not equal to null, then we're going to send a response back to the user saying, hey, like, do a better job, use a license, you should use a license, it's important. Maybe some links. So the way you do that is you take the message and you do message.reply. And we're just going to reply, you don't have a license. All right, so we'll give that a run. Let's try this one. It doesn't have a license. Should be able to get that to work. But we didn't get anything. It's not. Oh, wait, no, it should be if it is null. There we go. Oh, yes. You know what I'll do? Why don't I commit this so you can see what to do if you screw up a commit, because it will happen eventually. So let's say we commit this and say add message when user doesn't have a license. All right, so, and now we realize, oh no, we've made a terrible mistake. The condition is slipped and needs to be the other way. One thing you can do is just make a new commit. So you can just go and say, oh shoot, I made a mistake. Let me fix it and I'll just make a brand new commit for that. That's good in a lot of cases. So now we're kind of getting into something called Git history. It depends how much you want to preserve your history. We've been working entirely locally, so we haven't even got to GitHub yet. That's what I'm going to go to next. If you're just working locally and you haven't synchronized your changes with the larger world, only you know about these changes, then you're free to rewrite history, right? You can say that your commits happened in a different order. You can say that, oh, I decide this commit I actually just want to get rid of it altogether. It never happened. You can, slightly tweak commits. If you have a typo in your commit message, you can go back. There are ways to go back and edit that. You can do all of that stuff if you haven't synchronized your local code with your server. If you have pushed it up though, like when you're working in a team, so how is this code going to get off my computer to someone else? That's what GitHub is for. Okay. So if someone else is working on this, all of this I'm doing right here is just on my machine. I will synchronize it to GitHub. And once you've done that, changing the history starts to become a bad idea, because if they still have the other history, it's like alternate universes, right? You've gone and said, no, the history is this, but they have the version that says history is that. And so you have like conflicting histories. It's not a good situation you want to get into. So never do anything that will rewrite the history unless you're sure no one else knows about it except you. In this case, we haven't pushed anything, so it's fine to do this. So what you can do is there's something called Git Commit Amend. So you just add the changes that you want to. This is a way to kind of fix up the previous commit. So you can add the changes you want and then run. Let's look in our log first. So we see right now we're on the head of master, and we have this add message we just did. We do Git Commit Amend. You notice there's already a message. It reopens the last commit and stuffs different changes into it. So now look, the whole commit where we said not equals, it's like it never happened. And so now we write that. And if you look in the log, there's still only the one commit. And if we actually show the changes in our current commit, you can see there's no sign that ever happened. So this is the best way to go, doing like a commit amend. History rewriting is fine as long as no one else knows about it. Okay. So with all that being said, let's talk about how you actually use this with GitHub. And then the last thing I'll cover is how to like deal with merges and merge conflicts. So if you don't have a GitHub account, you can just head to github.com. It's very easy to make one. You will need one eventually, so might as well make it now. You'll need to set up a repository to synchronize with. So in this case, I'm just going to call this license bot 2. You can make it public. You can also make it private. I'm going to make it public. You can choose a license. You should do this, but I'm not going to do it for now. When you already have a local repository, you don't want to put anything in GitHub. You just want to attach your local repository to GitHub. So if you're actually just trying to set up a project from scratch, what I recommend is go make a new repository. Here's the easiest way to set up a repository from scratch. So go to this plus sign here, make a new repository, create repository, right? And then you get here and you can read, it gives you lots of instructions on what to do. But if you can just take this link here and then go to your terminal and run git clone that URL. And it's saying, okay, you have to clone an empty repository, which we did, so it's fine. And this will automatically set up your local version to be synchronized, like it'll associate them together. If you have a local repository already that isn't associated with the remote, that's fine, you can do it manually. So the way you do that is you just do git remote add origin, and then the URL, that same URL. So let's go back to our other repository that we had. License bot 2. Copy all this. And I guess we don't need any of this then. Okay. And it won't give you any feedback, but now we've attached, it's the same thing. If you clone, it just automatically does this. So if you're starting a new project, set it up on GitHub and then clone it. But if you already have one, you can also like retrofit Git to it as well. And then in order to actually take this, and so our local code, now we've associated them together, but it doesn't auto synchronize. Remember, because maybe you want to I always check things over before you push things up, check things over, make sure you haven't made any stupid mistakes. And then once you're sure that you're good to go, or you're reasonably certain, then you can push it up. And you just do that with a command called Git Push. So the first time you do Git Push, it's going to yell at you and say you have to do this long command. Not just because the remote has nothing on it currently. But if we run the command, I don't have this memorized. I just always run Git Push and it complains, and then I just copy paste what it says. A lot of Git is that way. If you're not sure what to do, just run Git Status. More than likely what it recommends is a good idea, and you don't really have to remember it, or you can just Google what you need to know. So now we've pushed it up to GitHub, which is our server. And if we take a look there, just reloading the page, you can see all of our files are here. So here's our git ignore, here's index.mjs, all of our stuff has been synchronized up. And notice also the stuff we ignored, right? Like node modules, not here. So that's how you synchronize it. And now other people can grab code from here too. And I can't easily show you that without having someone else add code to it. But what I can do is make a commit on GitHub. It would be very similar. Normally what you do is you add someone else as a contributor to your project, then they push up commits. And when they push up their commits, they'll be on the server, right? So this is you, this is them, this is the server. They push up commits, you don't have them, right? So if I just add something straight to here, it's gonna be similar. So that's what I'm gonna do. So let's just add another file. I don't know, we'll make it a README. Normally, don't use the GitHub editor because it's not that great. It doesn't it won't get a good editor that will check your syntax, warn you about problems. It works well for you. Don't just use the GitHub editor directly like this. But I'm gonna add this commit here just so you can see what it will look like if someone else makes a commit to your project. So now if you look here, you can see all of our commits. So this was the last commit that we did locally. This add message when user doesn't have a license. This create readme.md only exists on the server. You can also see this. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention this just briefly. These numbers over here, these are hashes. They're ways to uniquely identify a commit. So sometimes you don't maybe the commit messages can be the same for multiple commits. So how do you say this commits this one and this commits that one for sure? This commit hash, a lot of commands will if you want to do something specific, we'll say okay, refer to a commit. And this is usually how you refer to it. You use this hash. That also shows up in the log. Okay, so here, seems like nothing has changed, right? We can run git status and see, says everything's fine. If you want to check for updates from the server, one thing you can do is git fetch -- all. What that will do is see if the server has any updates, and then it will in my case, it gives me this little down arrow that says you need to pull things down. You can also just run git pull straight away. So the main one I would say to remember is git pull. What git pull will do if you run it is it will take any changes that are on the server and synchronize them down to your local machine. So in this case, we made this readme.md and you can see, okay, readme.md, one file change, one insertion. If we look on our local file system here, we should have it somewhere. Oh, I'm blind. There it is. You can see that it's the same changes. So this is what it will look like. So if someone else writes code and pushes it to your GitHub repository, then you'll run git pull and it will magically appear on your system. That's right. And you can do the same thing here. So if I add another commit, I don't know, let's change this to be. All right, so let's add that. Let's commit that. And then now we don't have to run that long command, we can just run git push. And that will take your local state and synchronize it with the server. So now if we go to here, you can see latest commit, update readme. If we go to the readme here, you can see this is a readme ×2 is right there. Okay, so those are basically 90% of the commands you're gonna run ever in Git are those things. So we've been doing it a lot, but do it yourself so you actually remember what they are and how to do them. But basically git add, right? So you're gonna make changes, run git status anytime you're not sure what's going on. Not gonna hurt anything. Then run git add, git commit, and then git push to push your changes up. If there are changes on GitHub that you want to have, then run git pull. The last thing I want to talk about is merges and merge conflicts. So this whole system with multiple people editing it, what if someone on the server, someone else pushes up changes and then you make different changes, right? This could happen because it's not all synchronized at the same time, right? You can choose when you want to get changes and when you want to send up your changes. So what's going to happen if that happens? Basically, Git is actually very good at automatically resolving this. So I'll give you an example. On the server here, let's update the README. Okay, so let's add, this is README ×3. So we'll commit that here. And then let's say we edit a different file on our local system. So I don't know, just let's do console.log hello here. So we edit two different things. Commit that. Okay, and you cannot kind of already tell from my terminal having the up and down arrow that you might be in some trouble. If you have different commits on remote and local, the way that's going to get synchronized is probably with a merge. So if you run git pull dash dash, if you just run git pull, it might reject it. I think by default it will actually try to do a merge for you, but I have mine set up to never do that. Like, because I want to make sure when I run git pull, if there's a conflict, I'll know about it. I can show you how to configure that later if you want sometime. But basically, it'll say not possible to fast forward aborting. And so then you need to run git pull merge. And what that will do is it will take the, oh, maybe not git pull merge. I thought it was git pull merge. What we can do is just fetch it and merge it ourselves. So your local, what git fetch dash dash all does is it will grab the changes from the remote, but it won't merge them into your local branch. So if you want to like see what happened on the remote without logging into GitHub, this is one way to do it. And that is stored in a branch called origin master. Branches are just like different states. You can think of each one as like a separate snapshot or a branch in the different commits. I might have my own branch that I'm currently working on. You have your branch you're working on. We can have a release branch if we have a product that like needs to have a stable release. And then we have the experimental branch with, all kinds of things in it that maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And it's fine. All of these can exist separately. And then you just need to combine the changes back together. So in this case, origin / master is our local copy of what the remote is. And so that's how we can take a look at what it is before we actually merge it into our own code. If you want to merge it into your own code, you could just type git merge origin / master, and that will merge the origins version of master, right? What's on GitHub into what we have locally. And okay, and it will automatically give you a default commit message of merging. I would just keep that. You can write your own if you want. And okay, so you can see it used the recursive strategy, one file change, one insertion. And so even though we had two separate commits, if they edit different files or even different parts of the same file, Git is smart enough to figure out, okay, no manual intervention is needed. Everything's fine. We can just take this and we can take that and we can put them together. It'll be okay. So this is the dream scenario, Hopefully when you work with other people, if you can try to work on separate things, that will make your merge life much better. That doesn't always happen though. Sometimes people will you'll both fix the same bug or whatever, you both do the same thing. So let's show an example of what will happen if you do that. One thing I don't like about this code is this line is very long. It doesn't even fit in my editor here. So what I can do to fix it is move this URL outside of this call. I'll just store it into a constant variable. And then I'll just use URL here. Okay, so this is a pretty good change. I don't know, maybe I think this cleans up the code, whatever. You don't have to like it, but that's a change we're going to make. Let's commit that here locally. Okay, so we can see the changes. Move URL into constant might be a good commit message. And then let's say our friend, which is in this case just me committing to GitHub, but again, normally this would be somebody else. On GitHub, they're also looking at this same line and they say, you know what, you have 0 error handling, because we do have 0 error handling. This is a very minimal version of what this ultimately you would want it to be. You would want to check to see if, because right now we just assume everything goes right, which is maybe not the best thing to assume. So one way we can fix that is by adding a .catch to the end of this whole expression here. And if something went wrong, we can get this error variable and we can just say log out that error so we can maybe debug what the problem was. Okay, so maybe separately, someone else decides, I'm going to change this exact same line of code. It happens all the time. So what do you think Git is going to do? Any ideas? Well, what would you do? If you were Git and you were trying to merge these things together, what would you do? Doesn't usually, it doesn't have to pull up Vim. You can set it to pull up any editor. But yeah, what it will do basically is, it's just a machine, it's an algorithm. It could try to guess what you want, but it might guess wrong, right? Do you want to keep both? Do you want to keep one of the changes? Do you want to keep neither of the changes? Maybe it's like a long conditional or something, and someone rewrote it one way and someone rewrote it a different way. And you can't have both things flipped or it's not going to be right, So there's no way for Git to really know. It's dumb. It only knows about text. So the way it resolves this is it doesn't. It just yells at you to resolve the problems. So let's see what that looks like. So we updated this here. If you try to push, we actually commit this. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. If we try to push. Okay, now it's showing up. If we try to push, if you just try to push and like the commits don't match up because it's diverged, like someone else has pushed something since you last pulled, you'll get this message and it'll say no. So it won't automatically try to fix it. It'll just say your problem, and it's going to recommend you do Git Pull to merge it locally. So we can do Git Pull. I thought it was Git Pull Merge, but I guess not. I don't know. I'll just run Git fetch again. We fetch that, and then we're going to merge in that branch, and we should get a conflict. So if you try to merge things that are in different files, Git can figure it out. Git will figure it out. It won't bother you. But if it can't figure it out, this is what will happen. You'll get this auto merging, and then it'll say conflict, and it will tell you all the files that had conflict. So sometimes it can merge some files, like maybe your commit touched 5 files, their commit touched 5 files, and 4 of the files were different, but one of them was the same, and it was like some of the same lines. Okay. Sometimes you'll get some things that are already, it'll say it's done. But anything down here in the red where it says unmerged paths, it's not going to be fixed. And so how do we resolve this? Okay. Oh yeah, it could be the internet too. Who knows? The Wi-Fi has been patchy for me in the past. Okay, so this is basically what we did. Zoom was we did a merge, and we had the same line that was broken on both, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we fix this? Git doesn't fix it. It just tells us to fix it, and this is how it tells us. So it says, okay, here's the conflicts we have. All the rest of the file is fine. Not worried about that. But right here it says this line here, line 19, that is what you had, and then this. All these greater thans in origin master, this is what the server has. And it says, I can't automatically fix these, you resolve it. And so the way you resolve it is you just read the 2 blocks of code and you figure out how to resolve it. So in this case, both of these changes are kind of mutually exclusive, like we're not mutually exclusive. We can have both, like there's no reason that we can only have one. So we could keep this from here and then just go down here and copy all of this and move it to here. And then we can say, okay, we don't need these lines anymore, get rid of all this, you remove the conflict markers, and there you go. That's how you resolve a merge conflict. So a lot of people get like super scared when they run into a merge conflict, like, oh, I don't know what to do, I'm just gonna give up. It's not that scary. You just have to read the file, look at the conflict markers, and then look at the version on the server, look at your own version, compare them, and then figure out how you're gonna resolve it. And sometimes that means take both changes, most cases I would say, but sometimes it means you just take one or the other. And then in terms of, we can run Git Status to see what to do. We're going to want to mark the resolution. So git add. And then just run git commit to finish the merge. So when you do a merge, it makes a merge commit. And remember how like when there were no conflicts, it'll just jump straight to this. But when there are, you just fix it. Git add, git commit, stuff you already know. Run that. And then the resolution will be fixed. And now that it's been merged, if you push, that same resolution can be pushed to the server. So since you fixed it locally, the same fix can be applied on the server. So you can run git push just fine. And there you go. You'll be able to put that onto the server. So with that, I will take any questions. Yes, that's a good question. So yeah, they don't want you to do password login anymore because, you know, a lot of big projects keep getting hacked because people use password login and it's not secure. What you want to do is go ahead into your profile. And then if you, one thing you can do is set up SSH keys. So if you're not familiar with SSH keys, basically it's just a really long string of text that is like a long password in a file. You can set that up and then you can just have your computer read from that file and use that as your password. And because it's SSH, GitHub will be fine with it. The other thing you can do is if you go into developer settings, it's actually pretty buried. and then personal access tokens. You can create a personal access token and use that as the password. And that's another way to get it to work. So
having to like run the command like git store or like git helper store like each time I like push the new repo. Is there like a way to run
you
that?
shouldn't. Oh, yes, you can. So if you run if you know the config, just add the -- global flag. It will set it up for all your repos.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Was there another question? Yes.
Did you cut out during a certain portion of it?
I think I disconnected, but I believe it reconnected me when the problem was resolved, whatever it was. So seems okay. Okay, there's some questions in Zoom chat. How do you make it so someone has to review the commit before it's pushed to master? So one thing people will do is do review. Basically, like before a commit is merged into your production branch, like somebody else has to look at it to make sure one person can't make some mistake. It's also just really good to learn how to write better code, have someone else read it. The way you do that is, so you can't, if someone has full access to your repository, like if you're the admin for the repo, nobody can stop you from pushing stuff. What you usually do in that case is have like a protected branch. It's like your master branch, your main branch, your release branch, production, whatever. And then you have an experimental branch where you just kind of let whatever be merged. The experimental branch, you let people just commit whatever they want to, or they make their own branches. And then you make it so that on GitHub won't accept any commits to the main branch. And you have to use GitHub's UI to like, because there's a whole discussion tracker. I wish I had time to go through all of that, but there's a whole like discussion thing where you can talk about like, okay, what do you think about this code? You know, what could be improved? And that, so you can set it up through GitHub to make it reject direct pushes and force you to go through that process. And then our other question from Zoom is GitHub the best tool for making a portfolio if you don't have a personal website? And I mean, that's obviously an opinion, but I think yes. There's actually a trick. Some people know it, but you can make a repo with your own name. So if you make is kind of, I don't know if this works on, there's other Git providers, by the way, like the other big one is GitLab, Bitbucket. They're all very similar to GitHub. But you can make a repo with your own name with a README. And then when someone goes to your user profile, it will populate that to this page. And you can add like a profile picture and like pin repositories you're proud of or whatever. So yeah, I think it's a good place for if you don't want to make a whole site. It's portfolio wise, I think it's a good option.
You see your GitHub link. A lot of people put that on their resumes.
Yeah, you can also throw it on your resume. Okay, any other questions?
Also, when you register for hackathons and jobs, they will ask you what's your GitHub link or your LinkedIn.
I honestly push up any work that you can make public. So like some professors are like, don't make my project assignments public, which fair enough. But any projects you're working on, like even if it's like super broken, like it just, you know, if someone sees repository is 45, they'll be like, oh, this person obviously writes a lot of code. They push lots of things up versus if they see repositories 1, you know, the last time they logged in was like 2 years ago. Then it's like, okay, maybe they don't really know how to use GitHub or they don't do a lot of coding. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for coming out and definitely come out to our workshops in the future.